So, hi everyone. So excited to be joined by the wonderful Nasara. So, I've been really excited for this call, Nasara.
Me too.
Yeah, I really have. So, firstly, huge congratulations is in order. So, recently graduated from Imperial studying public health. And not only did you receive a distinction, but you were also awarded the best dissertation. So just well done for that. So what was your dissertation about?
So my dissertation was essentially exploring the emotional experiences of women suffering from premenstrual dysphoric disorder in the United Kingdom. So
Amazing.
essentially, yeah. So that's what I explored in my dissertation.
Amazing. So, I mean, obviously, there's not enough research surrounding PMDD, particularly in the UK. I know there's a lot in the US, but not a lot in the UK. So, what was your reason for sort of focusing your dissertation on PMDD?
So I have PMDD myself. I've had it about, I think, since my first year of university. I think because you never really, I think for a lot of people, they either get a diagnosis quite early or like quite late in life. And I think by the time you've gotten it quite later in life, you've kind of blended your symptoms with who you think you are as a person. So essentially, no one ever really can give an exact age when they actually got it. But I would say I started noticing symptoms more, I guess, evidently in my first year of uni. And I never really knew what it was. A quick Google search, and I was like, okay, it could be PMDD. And I think so. I did my undergrad in medical sciences, and then I went on to do public health for my master's. And I just thought this is the perfect opportunity to kind of explore PMDD. When I was looking for information, there wasn't much out there. And I did a literature review into PMDD and then realized that a lot of research had been conducted in the US compared to the UK. And I think I found about one paper into the emotional experiences of women suffering from PMDD in the UK, which I think is absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And that was, even focusing on specifically on patients' experiences of receiving a diagnosis and the emotional symptoms associated with that. So not necessarily the emotional symptoms associated with PMDD. So essentially, that formed the basis why I did my research and why I did my dissertation on PMDD, because it's under researched, it's underfunded, there's a lack of awareness in both medical and lay communities. So I just thought, there's a gap in research and there's a gap that I'm going to fill. So that's what essentially formed the basis for my passion for
Amazing. I think honestly, I think it's amazing, especially because, like I said before, and like you've just said, the lack of research surrounding it, particularly in the UK, but also amazing that you, as someone who has PMDD, has just taken the courage to do it themselves and just to just find out that research. I think it's just amazing. I can imagine you probably had some struggles along the way with your PMDD, trying to tackle a dissertation. So yeah, I think it's amazing. So in your dissertation, you discovered 4 themes in your findings.
Yes.
So it would just be cool to sort of unpack each of them. So we'll start with the first one, which I believe is about living with PMDD. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Of course. So life with PMDD. So essentially, this covers living with PMDD, the day-to-day of just having PMDD. So varying from your follicular phase up until your luteal phase. And this essentially, almost all women I interviewed described it as feeling like Jekyll and Hyde. So I feel like this captures, the dichotomy of your personality when you have PMDD. One minute you're your usual self, however that may be, and then in your luteal phase, you're angry, you're depressed. You become this completely emotional person that makes different decisions, makes different just makes different decisions completely different to how you would normally. So so it essentially captures life with PMDD. So the disappearing symptoms of the luteal phase, so the rage, the depression, the hopelessness, the suicidal thoughts. So essentially living with that, because obviously, like I said, half so the PMDD hub, which I have, I described it as 2-week women, because for 2 weeks you're feeling completely different to the other 2 weeks in your month, essentially. And this happens every single month. So yeah, it captures that. It captures how women experience a mental fog. So during the luteal phase, which is when you experience the symptoms of PMDD, a lot of women essentially felt a loss of articulation. They struggled to essentially sort through their thoughts. They essentially struggled to articulate these thoughts to people, and that had so many impacts on their life. So whether it was, employment, education, personal relationships, all of these things. And there was also variance. So for instance, women always described that their symptoms varied from cycle to cycle. So one cycle could be anxiety, the next cycle could be depression. So it honestly varied from month to month, so from cycle to cycle, or even from moment to moment. One minute you could be feeling angry, and the next minute, you're crying. So there's just so much variance in it. So there's no exact, because I've seen research out there, I've seen questions out there that specifically state that, these are the symptoms you feel when you have PMDD, but they can vary from like person to person. They vary from youth to basically, when you get older. A lot of women describe feeling more depression in their youthful years, or more rage, and then as they got older they experience more anxiety. So that's essentially what theme one encapsulates.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it just, what you've just said encapsulates sort of how complex it is when you're going through it. There are so many symptoms, and it's not one size fits all. One person may cope with or face PMDD very differently to the next.
Definitely, and I think that's a
We
very key thing to
yeah,
highlight, because there's no set experience of PMDD. Everyone experiences it differently. I mean, there's some commonalities, but majority of it is different from person to person.
100%. And yeah, really, really important to recognize that. I think recognizing that will, so many people will understand that now and feel a little bit better about themselves, that
Yeah.
they're not alone with the way they're experiencing it. It might be a little bit different from the next person, but the way they're coping with it isn't wrong or abnormal. So yeah, I think
And
that's
I think
great. So
definitely, I think with PMDD there's a big sense of feeling alone, and I think even me, for the first time interviewing the women that I did, I think that's the first time I didn't feel alone. That's the first time that, like, I was like, wow, like there's other people who feel the way I do, because it does get so exhausting having to explain yourself to people
yeah.
all the time, or like, today I'm feeling a bit, my PMDD, I'm like in my luteal phase, in my hell week as we call it, and I'm not necessarily in the mood to listen to your problems today. I have my own problem.
Yeah.
I have my own problems. So it's like, it gets so exhausting having to explain that. But speaking to other people who get you is honestly so cathartic and so therapeutic. But
100%, 100. It's empowering as well, isn't it? Speaking to other women that are
definitely.
going through it. It is. So yeah, no, amazing. So the second theme is the aftermath of PMDD. So tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so essentially this theme basically describes the effects that so I spoke about the disappearing symptoms in the first theme, so like the anger and the rage. And this theme basically, so the second theme essentially explores the impact of this on a PMDD sufferer's life. So for instance, there was so 2 points. So there were 4 themes in total, which I arranged into 13 sub themes. So
Wow.
the second theme, like I said, the impact, this essentially covers. So at first I spoke about isolation, how a lot of women felt the need to isolate because they wanted to essentially spare their loved ones from the wrath of PMDD. They would get into their head, because another symptom I think is intrusive thoughts. Like when you're in your hell week, so many things are popping into your head. It's like, oh, I don't want to be a burden, I don't want to have to unleash this. And I think because it's cyclical, you also have that, what's the word, it's almost like it's overwhelming for you. So how much more those around you, every month you're coming with, oh, I'm sad, I'm feeling a bit
Yeah.
depressed. It's so easy to get into your head and say, oh, I'll just keep it to myself this month, I don't want to bother anyone else. And I think that leads to a lot of isolation, which then has a knock-on effect onto like relationships. So whether romantic, or whether it was just even friendships or family relationships. So even like a lot of women spoke about how, yeah, women who had like lived through it their whole life, so maybe around their 40s, spoke about how, yeah, they're alone now, but they kind of see it a bit better because they're essentially not being a burden on like someone that they loved. I mean, it's a very sad way to look about it, but that's the reality for a lot of us, because it's a thing of, can you cope with my emotions when my emotions come, during the luteal phase, and I'm sad and I'm this completely different person, you as a partner, or you as a friend, or even you as a family member, can you handle these emotions with me? And even if it's not necessarily you dealing with them directly, it's also the fact that like I might need to isolate for myself to deal with these emotions, and how is that gonna affect my friendship that maybe 1 week out of the month I'm not available for you. Do you know what I mean? So I spoke
Yeah.
about, yeah, how it affected relationships, the ability to maintain relationships. And then you also have other factors. So, for instance, education and employment. I think a lot of women spoke about how they'd walked out of, or they'd quit a job, or they'd walked out of a job in the middle of a PMDD episode, you know? It's just like, I
Yeah.
can't do this. Yeah, and that's it. And even, I think, which made me really sad because I'm a very ambitious person, it was just that a lot of women spoke about how they felt like they hadn't gotten as far in their careers due to PMDD, and that made me really sad because they had lived with it a lot longer than I had, and it was kind of like, is this what I have to look forward to?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so there were impacts on employment, and then education, of course. Sometimes just not necessarily having the will to maybe complete an assignment, and obviously for me myself, obviously just completing my masters and doing my undergrad with PMDD, it was tough at times. And not being able to explain to someone that, because a lot of universities don't necessarily have a mitigation service in place where you can say, oh, I was having a PMDD episode. So I feel like, I think during my undergrad especially, I struggled not being able to say, like, I feel low right now, this is why I can't do this work, and being able to use PMDD as a valid excuse.
Hmm.
But in my masters, a very big shout out to Imperial. I was able to use PMDD, and I was able to get extensions on some of my
Wow.
deadlines. So I
Okay.
thought that was, yeah, definitely amazing, definitely very progressive from Imperial. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean that is really progressive. I don't think there are enough businesses or institutions that are like there yet. They don't
Yeah,
know what PMDD is. So I think that's amazing that they've supported you through that because you're right,
definitely.
it affects your relationships, it affects your professional life. It really does. And I think we
Yeah.
we just need to hold our hands up and say, look, I need help. Um, because I think it's a scary thing to ask for help. So the third theme is about surviving PMDD and sort of coping mechanisms. What would you say are like, I don't know, the top three themes, let's say,
Um,
sorry, the top three coping mechanisms that you sort of found across the board?
so essentially, I would say one of the biggest themes is that a lot of women tended to move out of the city into like a town, which I thought was very, very interesting. I think, the
Hmm.
slow operation of like a town, and like, being by the water, just being in a very coastal space seemed to help a lot of women. But I would say in general, I think that kind of falls under lifestyle changes.
Yeah,
So moving to the coast, moving somewhere that made them happy out of like, the hustle and bustle of the city.
yeah,
Um, what else would I say? Another coping strategies, diet. So, trying to eat healthier, trying to minimize stress. So a lot of women tended to go for like low stress roles, which is, I think, is this feeds right back into them saying that they felt like they didn't get as far in their career as they would have liked because they tended to opt for low stress jobs, to essentially be able to just to improve their quality of life. um and then a second thing as well was a lot of women just spoke about just a need to understand what you're going through, and kind of the, what's the word, the relief that came with understanding, okay, this is what I'm feeling at the moment. Today I'm going to feel like this. And this obviously, it comes from tracking your cycle using menstrual apps such as Flow or Clue or whatever you use, just saying, okay, I know the last week before my period I feel like this. And like I said, symptoms too vary, but genuinely you can feel when something is coming on. So I think just being able to track your symptoms and associate a certain stage of your cycle to where you feel the worst, and then you being able to essentially plan your life around your cycle, because that's what you need to do with PMDD.
100%.
Yeah, so
Couldn't agree more. Yeah,
um yeah, so definitely I would say, so understanding, tracking your cycle, knowing when you're going to feel what and when you're going to feel low, so not to plan all of your social gatherings in that time, or to maybe do, let's say, the week before you're going to feel bad, to do your high stress roles or high stress tasks then, and then when you're feeling low, you can do the stuff that maybe doesn't stress you out as much. So that was
yeah,
it. And then I think the third one was also finding people to talk to, finding people that you could, finding people to be an outlet for you, whether that be in a support group, or just finding a close friend or someone who, just one other person that has PMDD that you can speak to on a regular basis about how you're feeling, or even just a close friend or family member who does have that time and capacity to be able to be there for you. I think those would be the top three.
Yeah, and I think they're great as well. And I think it's important. And I asked you three, I suppose, and I'm sure you had loads of different coping mechanisms when you did the research, but it's important to recognize that there are so many different types of coping mechanisms. It's not just going to be one treatment for
Exactly.
all people, because it's not going to suit everyone's needs. So I think it's important to recognize the different forms of coping mechanisms. Um, so yeah, I think they're all really, really good points. And for people that maybe don't have an outlet, if they don't have somebody that they can turn to and talk to about the PMDD, which I think is really, really important to have,
Yeah.
then people need to tap into the PMDD community, because that's how you and I got speaking to each other. That's
Exactly.
how I
Definitely.
got,
Yeah.
yeah. So they're never alone. And I think when I was going through it initially, I didn't know the PMDD community, and I was the only one that had PMDD, or so I thought. And it's lonely. It's really lonely. But I think
Very
there are
lonely.
so many women out there that will talk to you and make you feel better in an instant. Just speaking to them, going, "Oh my God, I feel awful," and them understanding will just make you feel 10 times better. So I think, yeah, that's a huge coping mechanism. I think is just sharing how you feel, and tapping into that community is really important. So
Definitely. I
yeah,
would say, even like with my research, I kind of, uncovered a lot of cultural differences. So there's research
right,
out there that say that, I think, PMDD goes against the usual disparities in health. So, for instance, so it's basically essentially saying that more white women have PMDD compared to black women, which obviously, when you now think about that, there's a lot of cultural, factors that play into this. So, for example, perception and all of those sorts of things.
yeah,
Um, so based on that, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make a support group for Black women who have PMDD. So I've done that at the moment, and I just, honestly, it brings me so much peace. Like, I'll be in Hell Week, and I'll be going through something, and I'll send a text like, "Hi guys, I'm having a tough week. I can't stop crying. Or I'm feeling really anxious," and they're just, sending lots of encouraging messages of support, just saying that, maybe someone else is in their Hell Week, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, me too," and we're just, sending words of encouragement for the week, or even being able to say, "Hi, I'm applying for a job. Like, do you take your that you have a disability when you're applying for jobs?" Like, just even being able to have a platform to ask those questions. Or
yeah.
um honestly, it's been a lifesaver. It's honestly been one of the best things I've done. So a
Well,
support group is definitely very, very
yeah,
important.
I bet, Nasara, I feel like, you said it's been a lifesaver for you, but I can guarantee the people within that community that you've built, you've saved their lives as well.
Mm.
I bet you're helping them massively by building that community. So I think that's amazing. Um, the fourth and final theme was about, seeking treatment and I suppose experience with healthcare, which I am interested to find out more about. Tell me a little bit about what you found.
So I can say almost all. I wish I had a percentage for you, but almost all of the women had negative experiences with healthcare.
Not
Very
surprised.
little of them, very little of them, encountered like a healthcare provider and were like, "Yep, these are your symptoms. You have PMDD. Great." A lot of them were dismissed. A lot of them were made to feel as if, it's just PMS, or even being like misdiagnosed for like depressive disorder or like bipolar. All of these things, and it's like, this all, worsens the quality of life because you actually have PMDD, and it's linked to your cycle. So coming into the doctors and being told that you're depressed, or that you have bipolar disorder, when essentially you only feel like this before your period, is very disheartening. And I feel like it's further isolating, because then it's like,
Yeah.
okay, if this is what they're telling me, who am I to argue with the doctor? Like, essentially
Yeah,
that's what it is.
because
And
you trust them the most, because they have got, they know more than you do, essentially, in
yeah,
some ways, don't they? So, well, in many ways. So it's really frustrating when there's more to it than what they've told you.
exactly, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, I get that. It's really frustrating.
And I think it's even worse when women have done their research, they've tracked their cycle, and they go in and say, this is what I have, and they're even like dismissed, and they're told, oh, it's just PMS, like, don't worry, it's nothing. When it's like,
Yeah.
I'm giving you this evidence, and you're still not doing anything about it. So I would say almost all women had negative experiences, and it's definitely, worsened their quality of life. It had disastrous impacts, and I think this is completely unacceptable, especially when you know that even in the UK, the figures, like, I feel like they're completely wrong, in my opinion. I feel like there are a lot more women who have PMDD, but they are either unaware about PMDD or they've been misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
But the figures for women in the UK, I think it's about 800,000 women have PMDD, and close to 600,000 will experience like suicidal thoughts and ideation. And I think that's, for such a large amount of a specific group to experience suicidal thoughts, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that there's such a lack of awareness in the medical community, And even through my work, I've managed to meet psychiatrists, and one of my supervisors was a psychiatrist, and she managed to, kind of get me into that space. And my supervisors, even being able to talk about it with their women health group, has shed so much light on PMDD. And there were like many psychiatrists that I presented to them, and there were many psychiatrists in the group, and they were shocked. And they were shocked that they didn't know the extent with which PMDD actually affected its sufferers, And it's like, wow, like, you're a psychiatrist, like, women are probably coming to you with these symptoms, and you've never heard, or you didn't know the extent with which it actually affected women, I just feel like with the increasing levels of stress in the world, and stress is also a risk factor for PMDD and worsening of symptoms. I just think with rising levels of stress, I think it's imperative that healthcare providers keep up to date with the latest PMDD research and take more of an interest in understanding how the symptoms affect women and how to spot these symptoms in a woman and a woman of menstruation age. But definitely, so
100%.
yes.
Yeah, you're so right. And I think, but it takes research such as yours to actually make them listen. And I think, it's not the healthcare professionals' fault, but they're not being taught. It starts from the beginning. They're not being taught about it. So no wonder they don't know. And it starts from research like yours, to actually make them wake up and go, okay, we've actually got a really big problem on our hands that we need to deal with straight away. That kind of ties me in nicely to my last question, which was, I was just going to sort of ask you, and it's probably going to open a can of worms, but what would you like to see change in the public healthcare system, and in terms of policies and that kind of thing?
Policies, I think. So I would essentially group the issues under three themes, essentially, or three headers. So I would say the first one is essentially support. We need better support from healthcare providers, and this comes in the form of awareness. So I would say a big overarching term is just an increase in awareness, plural. I mean, plural? An increase in awareness, like, period, where there's something like, there's a module, or there's, just a course on PMDD that's input into like clinician training. That's just, I think, a non-negotiable that needs to happen, because they learn about everything else. So, they need to learn about PMDD fundamentally. And I think once they know more, we know more. Because when a woman then goes to, for instance, the doctor, and she's telling him, feeling really low, and I notice that it's before my period, then that doctor now goes, okay, women can experience either premenstrual syndrome or premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I mean, there's PME as well, but for the sake of this, we will talk about PMS and PMDD. Women can experience either of these. But for us to get, be able to diagnose you, please go home and track your cycle. Simple. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
And that just takes so much stress out, because even a child, because people get it from the age of 13, or even from menstruation age, essentially. Even for a parent to say, okay, I'm taking my child to a doctor, I notice, she's become a lot more irritable. She's become a lot, she's showing signs of like really bad rage. Is there anything you can suggest? Then based on this information that this doctor has now gotten from, his or her training, can now say that, listen, try tracking her cycle, see if it's linked to her period. And then from then we can, explore other options if it's not.
Yeah.
And I think that's essentially the best way to increase awareness and even just more information out there. But I think fundamentally it stems from healthcare providers, especially gynecologists, especially all these people in places to impact change, that they have more knowledge of PMDD on a whole. And then I would also say, and that also comes with, I think, funding for research.
Yeah.
We need more funding for research. We need more women's health researchers looking into PMDD. I get it. We have endometriosis, we have fibroids, we have menopause, we have all of these issues, yes. But we also need, more people to look into premenstrual dysphoric disorder, because a lot of women are suffering and have no idea what they're going through. And women already have a lot on our plates, fighting in the workplace to, for equality, equity, all of these things. We have the home and all these things that we need to stress about. Like, our hormones should not be, a thing that especially causes us to take our lives, because that
Exactly. We're losing too many people. It's
we're
time to
losing too many
it's time to
people.
fund that research,
And
Agreed.
we never want it to get to a point where it's like so many women are taking their lives because of PMDD, because it does get exhausting. And I know you understand me, going through the same thing every month. Sometimes, honestly, I'm just like, I don't know how much longer I can do this for.
Yeah.
It's just
It's
so
exhausting.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. And I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily, I'm bad at it, like taking, like, the supplements, or just even like, I went to a healthcare provider in the UK actually, and she told me that, yeah, you can improve your diet, you can eat more of this and more of this. And I was like, okay, thank you. And it's like, I didn't feel much support. I didn't feel
Yeah.
much, I'm here if you need to talk. Like, have we explored all these other options? Which then, kind of ties into my third point. So once there's more research, then we have more information on how best to help women with PMDD, essentially. Because, our information comes from research.
Yeah.
So whether the supplements are truly effective, do they actually make a difference? Because we have a lot of women talking about, we have, what do we call it? Magnesium glycinate. We have, the chasteberry, all of these things that are recommended in the PMDD community. But we need research to be able to say this is, whatever percentage effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would say research, but I also feel like there should be an interdisciplinary approach to care for women with PMDD, because I feel like, so a lot of women, so I think 87% of my sample had received a medical diagnosis of PMDD. And
Right.
despite some of them receiving pharmaceutical intervention, so, going on antidepressants or whatever, they still felt the need to implement lifestyle changes. And I think this was very important to me, because it's like, the medicine clearly is not enough, If it was enough, they wouldn't find the need to move away from the city. They wouldn't find the need to, do all these extra things. So I think I would say it's very important through research, and I guess do research to explore how impactful interdisciplinary care can be for women with PMDD. So, for example, using therapists, or like cognitive behavioral therapists, essentially, to teach better stress management techniques. That could
Yeah.
also help with coping, And I feel like just maybe even employing the use of a nutritionist, what foods can make your symptoms better, because like some women spoke about triggers, so for instance like alcohol and all these things. So just even having a nutritionist to say, oh, these are foods that you can avoid that will make your symptoms worse. So I
Yeah.
think, and definitely, and like more research, having more information allows us to better help women with PMDD fundamentally. So yeah, I would say more research. I would say education, sorry, more research. I would say education for clinicians. And I would definitely also say, why not? Let's add it to relationships. What's it? Health and sex education in schools. Like,
Yeah.
let's add it to the curriculum, because boys
Yeah.
and girls should
100%.
know about this. We didn't ask to get PMDD. Unfortunately, our bodies are just extremely sensitive to the hormonal changes that happen in our menstrual cycle. So we should learn about it from a young age, because then young girls themselves will be able to say, this sounds familiar to PMDD.
Yeah.
Maybe this is something I might have, and then bring this information to a doctor. So I guess the responsibility lays on both parties, the doctor having the information, so when someone does come with symptoms, they can diagnose them. And then also young girls and women just essentially noticing that something might be off and then taking the leap to visit a healthcare provider. I would say definitely those areas for policy for sure.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And I think they all link together as well, don't they, really? And I think,
Definitely.
so, yeah, hopefully, with thanks to you as well, we can start to see these changes. But honestly, Nasara, this has been such an, I could talk to you all evening. It's been such a nice conversation. And it's just really refreshing to see that people are out there, you know, researching into it.
Definitely.
And I think it's going to make a huge difference. I really do. So thank you so, so much for sharing your information with us. And I know you said that you've sort of created a community. So how are people best reaching out to you on that?
So I would say, I think you can just, I guess you can post on Instagram, so you can just tag in the bottom the PMDD Hub. So essentially, it's a space where I'm trying to foster cyclic sisterhood, just creating a community for women to feel at home, to feel understood, and also a platform for me to share my research to give women deeper understanding into PMDD to essentially help them manage their symptoms. So you can just follow at the PMDD Hub. And if you ever have a question or you ever need to speak to anyone on the phone, I'm always available.
Thank you so much, Nasara. You are so lovely. And just thanks for everything that you've done. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.